All right, we're gonna bring our next guest here. It looks like Grayson's here. So yeah, won't you introduce yourself a little bit, and then what do you want to talk about? I've seen your name floating around, but I
Nice.
don't know much about you, and I haven't talked with you. So talk to me as if you're just introducing yourself.
Yeah, my name's Grayson. I do have a channel called
Yeah, I
Grayson Hawk.
saw.
Um, I saw in the description that you don't do debates. My channel, I do debates.
Yeah,
Um, but at the same time, like I at least pride myself on being cordial about it and just being
good.
openly interested in actually understanding the other person's positions and where they're coming from. And I try not to be a dick about it, basically.
Yeah,
The
for sure. What do you usually do debates on?
Typically, I'll, like, do, like, pseudoscience, like young Earth creationism or
Mhm.
flat earthers, but,
And you
I
you take the flat Earth position. I'm just kidding.
I do consider myself to be an atheist, so I do also, like, have conversations about the existence of God or,
Yeah.
historicity of the Exodus or things like that, and
Okay.
I just came across you, from I think that you were talking about this earlier in the stream, the conversation you had with Justin from the Deconstruction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had mentioned that you were hoping that it would have been more philosophical. I was gonna
Sure.
ask
Yeah.
maybe to elaborate on that. It sounded like you had gone in with the intention of discussing the ontological argument, right?
Yep.
Or like
Yep.
how do you wish that that conversation had gone more into kind of philosophical discussion? Because I'd be happy to have that with you.
Great. Yeah. So we did cover a lot of ground. We talked for an hour and a half. Um and I can forgive for like talking over each other. That just naturally happens. Both people are excited to talk, used to talking. Um and I can also it's understandable that he went to things that he was comfortable with. So like don't think that that was necessarily intentional, that he was like trying to expose me or whatever. Um so all in all, like I think he was well meaning, and was he was polite, enough to me. He never insulted me directly, obviously, and he was gracious that I was cordial to him, and so on. Um, yeah, but yeah, so the way it went though, I wish we had been able to just stay more focused.
Mm,
Um, and it's like this could have been any debate. Like you could even have formal debates, and things can go wrong. Like the moderator doesn't interrupt, the moderator doesn't keep the time well, or somebody just like doesn't answer the objections you threw out there. So it's like it
I've had over
happens.
100 debates
Yeah,
on the internet. I'm pretty well aware of all the different ways
yeah.
to
There's
potentially go about it.
tons of ways that it can lose focus, and so I just wish it had stayed on topic. Just talking cosmological, and it not being a debate. I would have been happy to have been like, okay, help me to understand more. Like, why do you think that, like it seems that his position was that the universe was just brute fact. Like he was happy with that, but he wasn't happy with the brute factness of God's existence, like God being the ultimate explanation of all things. He was happy with the universe being that thing, but yeah, so that's kind of what I took to be his position. But anyway, that's kind of a brief rundown and explanation of why I took to have mildly gone wrong. And then, like I mentioned earlier in this stream, just the comments were just murderous. And I think like as a YouTuber, like you just reply and it'll just kind of remove it for you once, and you don't really have to follow up. So he like replying just kind of these things, and he was like short replies like yeah, things
Mhm.
like that. But like people were saying just like horrible things about me.
It
Uh
gets pretty tribalistic sometimes in the
and it
comments,
gets
like,
terrible. Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, my guy decimating the other," and
Mhm.
yeah.
It's easy if you're not careful, it's easy to associate that with the person hosting. So
Mm,
I'm sure there was some of that, for me, with him. And it didn't help when, like I said, we got our wires crossed and he thought that I posted something in retaliation when I didn't. It was pre-recorded. Were you here when I explained that?
I
It
was
was like,
not. You
it
don't
was
have to
like,
explain twice.
yeah, it was like pre-recorded. I'd already reacted and then got the discussion with him, and then like released like the clips from that first thing. And he thought it was like a retaliation. It's like, dude, I was on a trip. I just like releasing stuff because I was
Mm.
late and lazy or whatever. But anyway,
I only,
so that's the thing.
I think I only made it maybe 30 minutes through. I was, like,
Mhm.
meaning to go back and finish listening
Oh
to it.
yeah.
with things. But then
So we may not even at that point derailed into like ancient Near East stuff and biblical
no,
stuff
hadn't.
much at all.
I
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I got a little bit
Got you.
annoyed with the cosmology aspects of like the ontological argument about sort of assuming that there's evidence that the universe has a beginning.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to maybe touch on some of the points of the ontological argument with you,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
because like I've I've audited a graduate course in cosmology before.
Nice.
I certainly don't see a reason to think from the current state of the evidence that the Big Bang theory or our understanding of cosmology would indicate that the universe as a whole had a beginning in terms
Mhm.
of, you know, the origin of time, energy, that kind of thing. Um, from my understanding of the current evidence, just seems to indicate that the universe was once in a much more smaller, hotter, denser state in the past. And then, I mean, there's like a limit on what we can know more beyond that based on the current evidence. Whenever I've mentioned the ontological argument in the past, it's basically like I, I just don't see a reason to assume a necessity for the beginning of the universe based on what we currently know about it. Um, And I was just curious about if your opinion on the ontological argument being maybe it sounded like you were saying that that was maybe one of the best or better arguments for the existence of God. Um,
Y- Well, I was just offering. I said, you know, yeah. So I opened by saying I think it's the one I'm most convinced of, and like just me personally, like maybe I'm just easily convinced by that one, and it's not the strongest. I don't know. So, um, but I think it boils down, and I offered 5 ways, and particularly the first 3 ways. Um, you can leave out the design argument and the you know the fourth way in degrees of being and stuff because it's very Platonic. But they're all cosmological and very similar. But the first 3 ways in particular, all very cosmological, deal with the infinite regress and so on. And I think ultimately it just, for me, what's most convincing probably is that um, you only have, logically speaking, 3 options. If something exists, it has the reason, it either has one, no reason or explanation for its existence, two, it has an explanation for existence and that's internal to it, or three, it has an explanation for existence and that's external to it. And that's logically exhausts the possibilities. So, and I think Justin went with one. He said, with respect to the universe, it has no explanation for its existence. It just is, like a brute fact. Um, and I think I'm not sure of anybody who takes the second route, that the reason for or explanation for its existence is internal to it. Because that gets you in terms of infinite causal chains that create themselves and it's just logically incoherent. Um, but that is the option Christian theists take with respect to God. He has the explanation for his existence within him, internal to him. Um, so I don't think either of the first 2 apply to the universe. I think it's the third. It's just that it has a explanation for its existence. I mean, it goes back to that real basic perennial question of philosophy: why is there something rather than nothing?
mhm.
And many
I think
atheists, I think,
I
unfortunately, just kind of want to say there is no answer. You can't answer that, and they get like kind of miffed at why you're even asking it. It's like, no, dude, every viewpoint has to answer this question. And if you're like looking at a scorecard of like viewpoints that answer this question, and theism has no answer, then that's a strike against the view, I think.
mm.
But anyway,
I think that's interesting that um, whether or not there's an answer to that question would count as a point or not. I kind of see it as, I don't know, more or less outside the scope of what we can know about the universe right now. But I think I've actually seen all 3 of those possibilities applied to our universe before. Like the universe
mm,
as root, necessary, existing thing.
mhm,
The fact that the universe, there's something about it internally that created itself, as in like the idea that when you add up all of the things in the universe, they sum to 0, nothing. So, they all counterbalance each other in such a way that they all add up to, on a net, the universe being, the something is equal to the nothing. I've heard that as an explanation, with some math um, thrown in to sort of support that, by
And that would
adding
be
up.
this. That would be the second option.
Yes, and then the third option would be some sort of, infinite regressive multiverses, I suppose, where each universe has a cause that's external to it. And I've heard, I think variously, all of those apply to the universe. I just don't think that I have any evidence to support one over the other. I mean, I guess I just come at it with,
Yeah.
I don't see why it would count as a point against any position to conclude that it's not an answerable question at this point, right?
Well,
That's what I would.
because an alternative viewpoint like theism says, no, there is an answer. And it's not just like a fairy did it or whatever. It's like a pretty robust explanation. Don't like it or like it. I mean, it's a very comprehensive explanation. And if you look at like, if you just judge it in terms of theories, right? So you've got like simplicity. That's the one that's all the rage with people, like parsimony. Many people get confused. They think that's the only criterion that you should judge your theories by. Like, come on. There's also explanatory scope. There's explanatory power. There's even like things like orderliness and beauty that get thrown in there. There's a ton of criteria when it comes to core theory. And um, so theism versus atheism on cosmology, if you just compare those two and you say, all right, let's look at your explanatory power and explanatory scope. Can you explain this fact? That I mean, and atheism is just going to answer no. Like honestly, if it's being honest with itself, um, or maybe not atheism per se, but like naturalism, materialism, whatever it may be, physicalism, whatever view it's adopting, it's just going to say no, we can't. Theism is going to say yes, and this thing that we're positing, God, has the ability and the explanatory power to explain a lot more than just a no answer. So, I mean, you can do this all kinds of theories, just in terms of like comparing theories.
Mhm.
I do this when I teach like intro to ethics. We go through like different ethical theories, and I'm like, all right, here are all these hard cases. Like, how well do the theories do? You know, like lying to the Nazis at the door. How do they handle that question? And so like, and you just build a scorecard. I mean, it's a kind of a it's not an exact science. It's it's almost like scoring gymnastics or scoring diving, but like excellence when you see it. In theories when something's being explained versus when it's not. And so that's what I'm referring to as like as far as scoring. As far as like actual quantitative points, probably don't apply, but you can at least realize that there's a difference here. One view has the explanation, the other view just doesn't.
And so you said that, oh, it's not just the same thing as saying fairies did it or something. Can you maybe
Yeah.
flesh that out about why, particular, like a theistic explanation for the cause of our universe would be any different than any other potential explanation for like the cause of our universe?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like any on classical theism, you get even from the five ways before you imbue it with any like Judeo-Christian stuff or Trinitarian Christianity, like actual theology. You still get like certain divine attributes, or what you can call divine attributes of this thing. Were it to have created the world, it would need to be very powerful. That's one thing. And so that fact alone explains some things, right? And then it would have to be very intelligent. That fact explains the existence of physical laws and their orderliness. It would have to be necessary. You get that from the third way, from possibility and contingency. And so this thing can't be a contingent being if I think it's impossible to have infinite regress or an infinite change of contingent beings, because they're just follow the third way, and then you're going to have to arrive at least one thing that is necessary. All those conclusions. It's important to note, like people don't realize this when you're going through the five ways. They don't get you the Christian God, and this is why so many traditions agree on them. Like even Indian philosophy agrees on this. I think Udayana, Indian philosophy, Maimonides, Jewish philosopher, Al-Ghazali, and so on, and Averroes and Islamic philosophers. You have all these modern, all these medieval, all these ancient pagan philosophers and so on. they all agree on this because it has a very relatively conservative conclusion. Like there has to be something that started it, and you can extrapolate and infer what the attributes of that thing would be, and it's just merely conservative things, features like very powerful, very intelligent, so on and so on. The contingency argument, the third one, for example, um, I don't know if you were listening carefully, but I said there must be at least one necessary being. Like polytheism, this can endorse, this can like support polytheism. So
I
it's very
understand that
broad and conservative. Yeah.
point, but are there? I mean, there are other religious and philosophical traditions that posit an infinite causal chain of things, right? Like
Yeah.
Buddhism, isn't that in the Buddhist philosophy? Is they're typically the universe has always existed. So I don't think that it's quite so universal.
No, I'm not saying it's completely, absolutely universal. You would probably know better having taken a cosmology course, like what Buddhism would hold cosmologically speaking. I have no idea.
Well, we can
But
learn
all that,
apology.
yeah, doesn't cover everything. Yeah.
Like a physics course in cosmology.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So, all that to say, you had asked kind of what does I don't know what the question was. What does Christian theism have to
No, I
offer
wasn't
as the
even
alternative,
asking
or
about
was it
particularly.
5 ways or something?
I wasn't even asking anything particularly about Christian
Okay.
theism. I was thinking, and
Or
you
just
did give
theism in
me
particular?
a question about.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
don't know if it necessarily hold. I don't. There were some leaps there, like concluding that whatever this cause was has to be intelligent. I don't necessarily see how that follows from what we know about
Easy.
physics.
Super easy. Like, so like there's orderliness in the universe. I mean, maybe it's perceived, but there's at least apparent orderliness in the
Well,
universe.
they arise from symmetry, yeah, and I don't see any
Right.
why
And so
you need
what accounts
intelligent
for
power in
symmetry?
order.
What accounts, but that's the thing. Like if you're going to like abductive reasoning, if you're like comparing theories and like here's apparent complexity and symmetry and order and so on and
Mhm.
apparent design, like even atheists, philosophers and scientists will say there is apparent design. Even Neil deGrasse Tyson, science popularizers, there's apparent design in the universe, but he's going to say it's not real design. So they will acknowledge there's apparent design. And so then at that point, it's like, well, which worldview accounts for this
Well,
in the best way?
I think we have plenty of actual observable, empirically
Yeah.
repeatable evidence showing how complexity and apparent design arises from non-intelligent processes that are relatively quite simple. Like
Mhm.
in complexity theory, like all the time get complexity arising from very simplistic base rules, like um, what's his name? Stephen Wolfram's done a lot of work with this cellular automata. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff in complexity theory showing complexity arising, or like, we have evolution where it creates a lot of things that you could say apparently seem designed, but I mean, that arises from very simple interactions with the environment and
Yeah.
mutation. So I don't know. I wouldn't see that intelligence would go along with that, or why, you know, this explanation would be superior to, um, I mean, I just don't see how it would be superior to concluding that we don't have enough evidence to make any such explanation,
Yeah. So
with any justifiable reason. And also, if you can, I would like to talk on that, but I would like to talk about the whole, um, infinite causal chain or infinite
yeah,
regress,
sure.
because that seemed like something that, I never really heard a good explanation from you about why you would rule that out as a possibility.
Yeah, I think it's I think if you just follow the argument, if there is, I mean, think very simplistically like a line of dominoes. If there are dominoes falling now, they had to begin falling. If you have no beginning, there's no
Why? I
begin
don't understand that.
falling.
Like, when I go on the Stanford Encyclopedia of
Yeah.
Philosophy and I look under the section of fundamentality,
Mhm.
it seems like there are three camps, metaphysical camps,
Mhm.
and my reading of that article is that none of them is has any argument that preferences one over the other. That being foundationalism, which appears to be your default. That's the only one that works. And I don't understand the argument for that over infinitism or coherentism, which are the three that it lists as being all co-equally valid among our current understanding of
It depends on who wrote the article. I mean, honestly, I mean, I write encyclopedia art. I've one on Acadia, and I'm going to write it a specific way. So, I mean, take it as the gospel truth if you want. I'm just noting that. I mean, I don't see them as equally explanatory or equally powerful. Because I think by coherentism, do you mean just everything's contingent and it has always existed this way?
So coherentism is the one that I'll admit that I'm the most
Yeah,
shaky of. I mean, the other ones are fairly easy to understand, whether or not you have some sort of basic metaphysical ground, or
yeah.
like foundational necessity level, which we talked about, and it versus an infinite regress. Those two are easy to understand. My understanding of coherentism is that you at a certain point, there's like a mutual reinforcement or like a mutual grounding of things like laterally rather than just being hierarchically
I get
causated
that. Yeah,
following causal chains.
yeah. There's still the question as to why the system exists in the first place. And it goes back to that very fundamental question: why is there something better than nothing? And
Mhm.
the universe as a whole, or call the system, or call it interlocking, self-reinforcing, whatever you want to. Like, you can euphemize it all you want, but it's still
I'm
going to
talking
come
about
back to that question. Like,
how
is the
does God
explanation for it?
how does a God answer that question? I don't understand.
Yeah. So that's the thing, though. It's like, if so I'll say it. So obviously, Christian theists will just say the explanation for its existence is within himself. So it's very similar to what I was saying that Justin opts for this option. Oh, the universe is. Oh, I guess there's different options. There's no explanation; it's just a brute fact. But apparently, some people take this with respect to the universe. Oh, it has this explanation for itself within itself. And I'm just wondering, like, what's the hang up then? Like, and then it seems to like kind of be a show of bad faith if you say, well, this seems super plausible if we're talking about a universe being able to have explanation for its existence within itself. But when you talk about God having an explanation for existence within itself, that's where I get, I trip on that. And it's like, dude, no, both have, let's grant the explanation for itself within itself. So I don't see why that would be I'm not saying you're doing this, but it would be a specific reason to reject the God explanation at that point.
I guess it's easy for me. It's easier for me to swallow that the universe exists. I mean, I don't think that anybody's got like a hard defeater for solipsism or whatever. But that's one
Yeah.
thing that I'm willing
Yeah.
to presuppose is that the universe exists.
Yeah.
And
We're in agreement on something. All right.
yeah, I think that most people also can swallow that pretty easily.
Yeah.
So, and whereas I've not come across evidence or a good reason in my view to accept that a God exists. So I guess
That makes sense. Yeah.
it's an easier leap for me to think, well, is the universe's existence necessary or contingent, given the fact that I already think it exists? And then like positing the
Gotcha.
explanation for the universe's existence of something that don't I don't see
So it comes
evidence.
down to parsimony.
Yeah, I guess it would be an appeal to parsimony in that it's just like one less thing in my ontology.
I mean, parsimony only applies if it's like all things being equal. And I don't think in the case of theism and atheism that all things are equal. I think that they have very different explanatory power and explanatory scope.
So you
That
think
I mean,
that if you had raised in a society that was totally atheistic or whatever, like you would never come across this concept of God, you'd be able to look at the current understanding of our universe and you'd be able to reason into a theistic position from that.
I don't know that I would. Yeah.
Well, it seems like that's like
I,
the explanations that you've given so far
yeah.
make think that you would think you would, right?
I
You'd
mean,
say,
that
our
that's
universe
just
has a
because my
design,
only
it's intelligent, therefore needs to be an external cause that has its own self-explanation. And like you,
yeah.
based on all the answers you've given so far, I'm surprised at how you answered that.
Well, I took it as just me personally. I don't know, consider myself all that smart, so I don't know if I would spend enough time on it to like really come to that answer and thought about it my own. But there are philosophers who didn't have revealed religion and still came upon it, like Aristotle. So, so the answer is yes, just I'm not smart enough to do that. That was my
Well,
answer.
yeah, I mean, Aristotle sort of had revealed a religion, right? I mean, he was a polytheist, or he was in a polytheistic society, so.
Yeah.
And they had their own cosmogonies of,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how the universe was created by gods or whatever. So,
For sure. Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. It just I was curious about, um, yeah, your understanding of that second premise in the ontological argument that the universe has a beginning seems pretty
Yeah.
definitive, but I don't know many physicists that think that that's what the Big Bang shows. And then
Why
I
do you
was,
think why do you think they resist that? Because the originator of the Big Bang is a Catholic priest who did think that there was a universe that had a beginning. Um,
it's interesting.
so
Have
it's
you heard?
certainly consistent. So it seems like it's not. It seems like it's not the physical scientific evidence that's determining that belief in many sciences. I grant to you that many scientists hold that belief. That's fine, but
I
there
would.
may be like extra scientific reasons why they hold that belief.
Have you
I could
heard
like
the
chalk it
anecdote?
up. Go
Have you
ahead.
heard the anecdote about when George Lemaitre, the Catholic priest in question, met with the Pope? Have you heard
Mm.
that? The fun little
No,
anecdote.
no. Go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah.
where so the Pope says, "Wow, isn't it great? Like you've discovered this theory that shows that the universe had a beginning, and like it's like evidence for Catholic faith." And actually, George Lemaitre himself said, "Oh, okay, hold on. I don't say that
Yeah.
because scientific theory, which is provisional and subject to change when more evidence comes out. And so I don't want to try to use a scientific theory to bolster a theistic position because it could change tomorrow. And then, we got egg on our face. And then, it would degrade the authority of the Catholic Church. So that's what
Yeah.
the priest himself is alleged to have told the Pope. I don't know. I don't think that there's
Yeah.
actual evidence that this happened, but I've heard that
Yeah.
anecdote quite often. But
Yeah.
um,
I I think it's
the it
really
is, right? The
it
issue
show
why most
go ahead.
scientists would not say that, like, we have evidence of there being a beginning to the universe, it is because our understanding of physics begins to break down at a certain point when you get into dense enough
Yeah.
regimes where things get
Yeah.
so hot and so dense that you can no longer say, oh, well, here's an explanation of what was happening. So our evidence only goes so far back as to like, the cosmic microwave background, which is 380,000 years after this, T equals zero moment where
Yeah.
all these waves were in alignment. Um, and we don't have an idea about what space and time are on a fundamental level.
Mhm.
Our current theories just, we don't know if they are emergent or if they're fundamental to our universe.
Mhm.
If they're
Yeah.
emergent, what kind of spaceless, timeless physics do they emerge out of? We
Yeah.
don't have answers to these questions. And so, based on our current understanding, all we can say is the universe was in this much hotter, smaller, denser state in the past, but we can't make any claims about, well, where did that energy come from? Did it come from
Yeah.
anywhere?
Yeah.
Or what was space and time doing at that level? Like, what was the
Yeah.
physics going on? We don't have the current theoretical explanations to even calculate.
I
So,
I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that, and I think scientists speaking qua scientists, as scientists, that's all that they can say. I mean, sure, many scientists, like I said, I grant, are naturalists. I mean, more than methodological naturalists, which they need. I mean, even George Lemaitre was a methodological naturalist, but at the end of the day, he wasn't a metaphysical naturalist. But I mean, you got to do that. You got to you can't just assume that your chemistry experiment is going to have intervention of angels in it. You got to kind of bracket that apart. But that's that's fine because you're only examining the natural world. Which, I mean, you're making real conservative claims here that anybody, no matter their metaphysical background, can agree with because you're only describing the natural world.
Mhm.
And so, like, if a scientist comes out, if you have a consensus, if you have universal agreement among scientists that say we're all atheists and the universe has always been here, like, you shouldn't believe them because they're not making a scientific claim.
Yeah. I
So,
would also say one
and
thing that
I
just
only brought up the Lemaitre example to show that like not all scientists do that. I don't take that as like, oh, this is my evidence that this is what scientists claim instead. That's not at all what I was
yeah.
saying. Yeah.
There was a certain time, like in the 1950s, where it was popular to say, "Oh, the universe began as a singularity and things," but modern cosmologists don't
Yeah.
really have singularities of being actual physically real objects. It's just the point when the
Yeah.
math stops mathing.
Right.
But I will say that I think in your discussion with Justin, it got up to the whole idea of like a big bang and then a big crunch and just an
Yeah.
infinite cycle of that.
Yeah.
You had said that there wasn't evidence or you didn't see why that would happen. I will say that as of last year in 2024, with the new DESI results, they showed that given our current best understanding of dark energy, it's getting weaker, which does mean that, you plug all that data into our cosmology equations, and it would show that the universe will eventually collapse back in on itself. So
Well,
that,
not
again,
necessarily though. I mean, that's a prediction. Like it could just stop expanding. Is that
well, like I said, this is based on our current understanding of physics and evidence. So
so?
interestingly
It's
enough,
important to be precise and to be conservative about like what you can claim given the evidence. And I mean, you could say it works with this theory. It works with this theory. It works
so
with
this
this
is
model. It
just
works with this
given
model.
the,
And most
uh,
people prefer this model for these other reasons. That's totally fine. And then,
this
but
is just given our understanding of relativity, general
yeah,
relativity, and like the Friedman, Lemaitre, Walker, Robertson metric equations, where
mhm,
basically like even if you had a universe that was like the size of our universe, and you had all the whole universe, it's like a toy model universe, and there was just one grain of sand in that universe, that grain of sand would eventually cause that universe to collapse in on itself, because any amount of matter without a force to
mhm,
counterbalance the gravity is eventually going to cause space to contract all the way until you
mhm,
get this point that can no longer be described because it's so small and dense.
yeah,
So any amount of matter without like enough dark energy to counterbalance it, something that's going to cause the universe to keep accelerating in this expansion, is going to eventually collapse according to what we know about the universe right now. Now, maybe we might we don't know what dark energy is. Maybe we might figure out what it is in the
yeah.
future, just based on our current understanding of the physical laws of our universe and what's in our universe based on what the evidence shows us. It does seem like we're headed towards contraction and collapse, which I don't know if that necessarily bolsters that there's been an infinite series, but it kind of makes you wonder more than if we weren't headed in that direction, right? It makes it like if we just saw that the universe was going to keep expanding and accelerating forever, then I would say that the whole infinite uh, crunch and bang cycle is less likely. But if we're seeing that our universe is currently going in the far distant future to another crunch, then it at least it would fit in with the infinite cycle of crunches and
The
bangs.
oscillating universe. Yeah. The thing is, though, if it crunches, how's it going to explode again? I mean, forgive my ignorance here, but I mean, I've seen models of stars colliding. So is it something like that? At that point, I mean, or because it seems on the models that we're told it's going to go straight back into that absolute point, and then
Yeah. So
somehow it's not going to be like those models with smashing stars that kind of hit each other and they kind of eventually orbit and so on. But like it's going to go right back to singularity and then come back out. Like
well, see,
how's
that's
that
the
supposed to
thing
work?
that again, most cosmologists don't think that singularities are actual real, physically real
Sure, they
things.
have no
It-
ontological status. It's just the point
yeah,
at
well,
which things meet.
it's not even a point. It's a mathematical artifact. It just is
Yeah.
the when our math starts spitting out infinities and no longer works to describe what's really going on.
Okay.
For example, in the equation of fluid dynamics, there's a singularity every time you have a drip from your faucet.
Mhm.
At the bleeding edge of a like a water droplet,
Hmm.
the math of fluid dynamics shows that there's a singularity there, a point of like
Mhm.
infinite curvature, which we know clearly is not true. It's just that our
Yeah.
mathematical equations are only so accurate. And
Yeah.
so we need better physics in order to like once
Need
you
better
get to
math.
the universe is condensed so small and so dense, our math just doesn't math anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
accurately describe what's going on.
Yeah.
So there's really
So
no
this
way to say what would happen.
so let me just give you kind of a step back because it sounds to me now I don't know anything about math, I mean, I took graduate logic courses with graduate math students, so like, but I don't. When it comes to numbers, forget about it, right? And so, but just thinking about this, like from bird's eye view, um, it sounds like it's a new mathematical system that's needed in order to
Mhm.
go forward. But
Yes.
that's not what you're hearing the scientists say. You're saying it's almost as if they're describing it as just like this really special moment at which nothing works, and so it's got to be doing some mysterious things, and they'll kind of speculate about what it might be doing, and so on and so. Which is totally fair, make those speculations, but like they're making metaphysical speculations about it. But imagine somebody like a Newtonian, you know, physicist trying to do this and saying, well, this is the point at which beyond which math doesn't work. And so it's very mysterious and like, and then concluding metaphysical theories based on the limits of what they're currently working physically. It would just be really, really silly. Don't you, don't you agree? So like, is that kind of a parallel of what's happening here? It's just like, we just need better math, metaphysics.
So interestingly enough, I think the fluid dynamics example is a good example of this, where the math of fluid dynamics is giving us infinities. It's giving us a singularity, just describing a water droplet.
Mhm.
What actually needs to be understood is um, it's almost more metaphysical, right? Because there's a faulty
Yeah.
assumption of math of of being continuous, like a fluid is continuous. But what we had to learn was the actual ontology going on was that a fluid is made of atoms, which are discrete. So it's not continuous. And that's when you can calculate it from atoms from that perspective, then you no longer have the singularity. You no longer have this issue of like having infinite curvature because it's discrete. It's made of atoms. And
But
so
what
there was a
about when what about the
there
limits of the atoms? Like,
yeah,
don't you have the same problem?
mm, well, it's quantized in quantum mechanics, so
Yeah.
it's not discrete, but you have you run up to this similar, like, a problem where you need a sort of leap in your understanding of the actual metaphysics, like the ontology of what's really going on, which I would say probably has to do with space, because right now, our understanding of space is continuous.
Mhm.
And that's where you get all this idea of, quantum gravity and trying to quantize like space or all these different ideas in physics. But
Yeah.
we don't have right now any kind of experiment that can settle like string theory is an example of something that does explain this quantum gravity, but we just have no way of testing its validity, even though,
Yeah.
there's lots of very interesting aspects of string theory, but you get to a certain point, and this is where I kind of understand it to be that there's a limit to the things that humans can know about. I mean, I think that at a certain point, like we
Yeah.
can
Oh,
develop
yeah.
theories that are just outside of our epistemological limits.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously science can explain a lot. Um, and let's bring this back to like the theories and, whatever you said. Did you say you were a naturalist, more or less? Okay. And I want to get correct on that because not every atheist is a naturalist, but is a naturalist. And then it's like, for lack of a better term, a supernaturalist, a Christian theist or something like that. If those are the theories that are competing here, the worldviews, um, like how do you as naturalists account for emotions like love, consciousness? Like those are really, really hard problems that are insolvent when it comes to like basic things that you use and interact with every day that I think would be another, if like you compare in scorecards, like even rationality itself, there's no reason why atoms smashing together should somehow be rational, be orderly, um, enough to kind of
I think
emerge into consciousness. For you to have the similar experience, you say you agree that the external world's out there. How that I'm able to have awareness of it in the same sense, exactly parallel with your awareness of it. Not exactly we experience colors and smells all that differently, but like spatially, like we experience it the same way.
Mhm.
Like how is that possible?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that
like
there are
all
good
these things that yeah, I mean anyway, yeah, go ahead.
So I might not be able to pin down the exact neural circuitry that is generating consciousness,
For
but I
sure.
do think that eventually humans will understand that, and I understand that that would be like an optimism on my part. Like I don't know that
It
for sure,
is, yeah.
but I do think that we will have at a certain point a molecular grained understanding of consciousness and how it's generated. Um, I do think that it's generated in the brain, and I do think that there are very good reasons why um, consciousness would evolve. It seems to be like there are like environmental pressures that would have a very good explanation about why consciousness would be favored over non-conscious entities. We could go into that. I'm not sure if that was exactly what you're asking, but
Yeah.
when you say things like emotions or
Yeah.
awareness, to me, all that's going back to consciousness.
What
And
about ethics?
the ultimate reason for most of this stuff is just for us to survive better in our environment. Like if we're aware of the spatial dimensions of our environment, we're obviously going to be able to better find food and better avoid predation, right?
There's no explanation. There's no, let's say, there's no reason why I should be conscious.
I can think of several actually. For example, I think
Why
that
isn't a rock conscious, for example? Like it needs to also persist its existence.
well, a
But what,
rock doesn't have metabolism. It doesn't need to find food. It doesn't
why,
self.
yeah, like
So
there's no
like
reason
all
why I should have metabolism. You know what I mean?
things
Like,
begin evolving when they self-replicate. A rock does not self-replicate,
yeah,
for example. So once you have self-replication and you have variety, and then you have basically like an environment that would put selection pressures on, then you're off to the horse races, right? You begin this Darwinian evolutionary process. The When we compare a consciousness to a non-consciousness entity, the entity that's non-conscious sort of um, would be unable to adapt to a lot of novel stimuli where every single stimulus would need a pre-programmed response, right? But with a conscious entity, you're able to adapt to stimuli that you have no pre-prepared response to, that you've never encountered before,
I, g-
um, in a much more novel, dynamic array of
yeah.
stimuli. Because, like, think about how energy efficient our brains are, and I would posit that consciousness is a big reason why they're so energy efficient. Because if there was no consciousness, amount of brain power that would have to be devoted to all the different potential responses that we could have to all the different potential stimuli that we could come up with, I'd say that it would be a much larger drag on our overall energy levels. It would take way more energy for such a brain than a conscious brain.
Are you familiar with David Chalmers' hard
Yes,
problem of
and hard.
consciousness?
Yeah.
See that what you're describing only accounts for the soft problem, or the easy problem of consciousness. The idea that, like, this computational consciousness, it doesn't account for qualia or anything like that, which is like normally what people mean by consciousness. You're
Yes,
talking
that's
about
what
like
I'm
this
talking
kind of
about with that.
software. You're talking about the kind of software. I mean, you may want to talk about qualia by what mean that when you're saying consciousness, but as far
Let
as
me
like offloading the stuff from the hardware into the software so that now it's much more efficient, like you're just talking about computational stuff. You're not talking about actual experience and self-awareness
well,
and
I
all
think that
those sorts of
experience
things.
fundamentally computational, but let me explain this way, right? If you have a self-preservation instinct, right? That requires a self, that requires consciousness, essentially. Like you could have all of the different responses for all the different ways to preserve yourself, given all the different stimuli, or you could have just enough neural architecture to create a self and a sense of, wanting to preserve that self. And then you have all of the advantages of all of the different, millions of potential responses to different stimuli. And you have them all just with having to generate one thing, a self, because that
Yeah.
self can have that self preservation that can adapt to all manners of different scenarios that you would have to pre program in otherwise.
Who's experiencing the self?
The self is, it's self aware.
Yeah, man. Like the problem with this, metaphysically speaking, um, there's two different methodologies in play here, and the scientifically minded usually go with like outward in, whereas like phenomenologically, if you're phenomenologically minded, you're going to go inward out. Like you're going to say the self exists, I'm the self, I exist, and then you're going to start identifying things. And so you're
So
using that already. You're sort of like presupposing that there is a self
let
as you're
me,
describing this to me, and like you're like, this is what happens, this is how it got here, this is how it got here, this is how it got here, and then you're
I'll
like,
clarify.
voila, and now the self is here. It's like, whoa, you just like miss a bunch of steps in there. You know what I mean?
So I'll clarify, and then I don't think the self is an actual thing that exists beyond like the different objects. Basically, you have neural activity, and then you have like copies, like loops generated inside the brain for each one of these different inputs, you could say. And essentially, this is coming from also the previous caller was talking about their experience with meditation. I've also been an
Yeah.
avid meditator for years, and the insights that I've had about the nature of self from meditation is basically that if you have no, how should I phrase this? Essentially, the way that I view awareness and consciousness from my own experience is that there's a sort of, you can be aware of a thought, you can be aware of an emotion, you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
aware of a sense or something, but these are all inputs that you can be aware of, and
Right.
anything that you can be aware of is an input. Um, and without those inputs, there is no self. You can't be aware of nothing, or else
Who's
there
you?
is no.
You keep using the term you. You can be aware of these things. You can be
Yeah,
aware of these. Like you're like you're presupposing a you that's already there to be aware of those things.
I'm just using the language of.
I
I mean, this is
understand it's
how
like it's a heuristic, it's linguistically helpful, but I think it's also ontologically and loaded. I think
well,
that
I don't know
the
how to.
language here reveals what's really going on in many senses, like because it's like subject object
Yes,
language that you're using. Yeah,
yes.
dress up in whatever language you like, but it's like you're saying there's a subject who experiences, and that it seems is prior to anything else that you're bringing in order to account for the thing that you already said was
I'm
prior.
trying to explain that it's not that, but I get that my wording is
Hmm.
confusing. It's just because I don't think that English was
Yeah,
formulated in such a way to convey these
yeah.
ideas. But I'm not saying that there is a you that exists, or like there's a subject and an object distinction. I'm thinking every time that there's a subject, your brain is create, or anytime that there's an object, your brain is creating a subject or whatever. You know what I mean? Like every time that there's an object, your
Whose brain? Whose brain? I get what you're saying. It's hard to say it without using the language that we're already using. But I think again, I think it's ontologically very telling as well.
I mean, I would have to. It's just because of the way that English is formulated. I mean, if I were really to
I
take
think
my
it's more
time
than
to
that.
you, I would have to dictate the brain that is in the head of
Yeah,
the human being who's on
but
the
then
other end.
doing it that way, you don't get the result that you're trying to get because
Why
it's
not?
like you don't get unity and you don't get possession.
Can you elaborate on that? I don't see your point
Yeah, so like
because
there's
to me,
whole
they're equivalent.
arguments. Yeah, so unity of the there's certain arguments for consciousness, like the unity of consciousness, right? Like all these like inputs that you're describing are like these multivariate things that something is experiencing. Like if there were nothing
Oh, I'm disagreeing
there
with that.
experiencing, if there were nothing there to experience it, then it would just be still metaphysically speaking, it would just be a plurality. It would be things.
Yes.
That's it. And there would be no unity to unify them together as being a coherent conscious experience. And yeah, that you also don't get possession. Like what does this thing belong to? It's just atoms smashing around in somebody's head. Like, and obviously that's not necessarily the full story because, you know, there's atoms smashing around in your brain, sure, but like you're trying to get to consciousness, not just brain activity. So it
I don't see a difference between consciousness and brain activity.
I do.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can
Yeah.
change
I mean,
by brain activity. Like it
are
just
you?
seems like.
Let me ask you: are you a mind identity theorist or like an emergence theorist when it comes to like mind brain
Yeah, I think that there
relation
is
or what?
a neural circuit that is like identical with consciousness, basically. Like if you were to have a cup of water and you were to like have a bunch of salts in that water and you were able to make them move in a way that was identical in my brain, then you would have a conscious entity in that water that's experiencing the same thing I am.
That could be a variety of different views. You mentioned the word identical. I don't think it entails you have to be a mind brain identity thesis. I would shy away. I'd recommend shying away for that because it's been largely discredited since like early 20th century. Um, and then there's like emergent views, there's epiphenomenal views, and so on that are all consistent with what you described. Like these, and then of course there's like dualist views, substance dualist, property dualist, and so on. So, and I think that's even consistent with what you described as well. So,
I think that eventually we will find out the exact movement of molecules that generates consciousness. I mean,
is
I think,
consciousness itself physical?
well, it's a physical motion of things. Yeah.
Is an idea physical?
Yeah. It's a physical pattern of ion movement in your brain. Like a
So
specific,
that seems pretty strong mind identity brain thesis. Like just an idea just is a neuron.
well, it's not a neuron. It's a
Collection,
pattern
a
of
set,
movement of
pattern.
different, not just
Yeah.
neurons, but also salt ions. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
very distinct pattern of movement.
Yeah. Are you familiar with I mentioned this before on the channel, but there's a anthology called The Waning of Materialism. It
I
came
haven't
out
heard.
in The Waning of Materialism. I'll put it in the chat. It's OUP Oxford University Press. It came out in like 2010,
Okay.
and it's like 23 different philosophers. And every time I recommend this, people are like, "Oh, argument from authority," and it's like, dude, shut up. Read the actual arguments in the book. Some of them are really good, and they use these arguments like the argument from unity of consciousness. There's one in particular that I really like called it's by David Barnett called "You Are Simple." It's David Barnett. He's not doing philosophy anymore, but fun fact, he was the inventor of pop sockets. The thing that go on the back of your phone. He invented them. And he's got like this book and this, landmark anthology for some reason. And his argument, for example, "You are simple," is just the idea that if we were to blow you up and all your atoms, like zoom in, like to where each of your atoms is like the size of a star, let's say, and like the same distance away from stars as other stars are now, there would be nothing if like that's who you are. On materialism, that's just who you are, just atoms. There is nothing to unify you, and so it's just there should be no unifying consciousness. And he talks about like simplicity in the sense of not having parts. So so metaphysically speaking, just simplicity is just not having parts. So there is a you, therefore I forget how the argument goes, but there is a you that is not composed of parts, and that you are simple, uncomposed of parts, and that whatever. I don't think he takes like any particular, at least in that essay, particular view on like what the you is, but at the very least, you're going to be simple, uncomposed of parts.
Yeah, I don't see that from my own experience. That doesn't seem to be the case. Like if there's no like input that to be aware of, there is no self. Like
You
I
can
was
totally
going
get
for a Buddhist line with that, and there's a great actually when I was in the Himalayas at this Buddhist temple, this monk gave a similar sort of anecdote that you did, and I just think that maybe you might get a kick out of this, where he was talking about looking for the self is like stripping layers off of like a banana tree, where you like you like try to find out where is the banana tree, and you strip layer after layer after layer, and if you know anything about banana trees, like there's no inner core, like it's all just composed of layers, and eventually you have all the layers and there's nothing in the core, like there was no self. And so this was, told to me by this monk, and I thought that was just a great analogy of basically the self is this sort of illusion. And there's interesting work in split brain patients as well, in terms of the left brain interpreter, as being this area of your left brain that is responsible for creating this illusion of unity for all your different brain areas, where they have they'll expose a split brain patient to a certain stimuli that their left brain cannot see. So they don't have any conscious awareness of seeing the stimuli, like a hammer.
Right.
But then they'll ask them to draw something, and their right brain or whatever will draw a hammer. And then they'll ask, wait, why did you draw this hammer? Because they were not aware of ever seeing the hammer stimuli. And then they will make up an entire story like, oh, well, on my way to this office, I passed by this fence, and it reminded me of the time that I was building a fence with my dad and he handed me a hammer. And they have an entire conscious experience about why they drew the hammer. But the scientist knows why they hammer, because they were given a stimulus.
For sure.
outside of their conscious awareness. And yet they had
I
a
totally,
completely fabricated unity of experience.
yeah, I've heard
But
of these kind of
it was
experiments.
just
Like,
totally false.
yeah, I don't think they're very conclusive in telling us what exactly is the mind is or anything like that. But I think they can lend support to various number of theories, but like not single out any particular one. But one that's super interesting that seems to single out naturalism as not being able to support it. Have you heard of hydrocephaly cases where the water in the brain, like
Yes.
mostly happens in freeborn fetuses and then children who like don't live very long, but it happened. There's a case in 1980 where it happened to a dude, and he's walking around like doing math, like it was a math major at a university doing quite well in his 20s, and he's got almost no brain because the fluid in his spine had like pressed up and like filled in everything. So like just this thin layer of brain that's pressed up against the skull. And that seems
So
like
I do think
really
there's a
hard.
minimal,
I mean,
there's like a
unless you
minimal
want to say, well, we compressed it, but it's like, hold up, it's doing all the same functions and doing some of them really, really well.
I
And
remember looking up the details of this case and finding
yeah,
that he wasn't performing the same as everybody else.
yeah,
Um,
probably better
I,
than I am because I don't do math all that well. But yeah, go ahead.
and it seems like one of the key areas that's necessary for consciousness is actually the brain stem.
Mm.
And his brain stem was not part of the area that was under like you know, being compacted by fluid. And like I've seen that case being brought up, but I think it's highly exaggerated in terms of the
Yeah,
amount of
yeah,
encephalopathy and then the amount of his
yep,
cognitive performance, where he was still like functionally special needs in terms of his
for
cognitive.
sure. Well, I mean, you might. I think it's still extraordinary case, even if you want to say, okay, 96% of the brain was gone, is what people claim, but in reality, he had 67%. It's like that's still extremely remarkable,
Well,
even if it was like fully reported. You know what I
think
mean?
about
Like, and I think it throws a wrench into like a naturalistic explanation is that the brain's supposed to be doing all this work, and yet and they also often combine it with an evolutionary explanation so that it gets there in very, very long, short, like incremental steps. And yet this happened within months or years. And did the brain suddenly evolve or develop on him so that like it can compress within that physical space so densely and then still do all the things that it's doing with like minimal interruption?
yeah, so I think that there's obviously neuroplasticity, but I will just say it
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me that much because there's still a lot of brain area and neurons left in that case. And when we think about the animals that we would consider to be minimally conscious, I'm not even sure if like fish and reptiles are consciousness, but I would feel safe
Mm,
that mammals are conscious.
mm.
And you look at the size of a brain of like the world's smallest rodent or something. There's a really, really, really small brain, and we would still consider that to be conscious. So, like, even if 90% of the human brain was flooded, that's still a much larger amount of neurons, like just an area and volume than that tiny little mouse's brain that was
Sure, and I
doing all.
totally buy, like, being able to compress things because we're getting better and better at it with, like, technology, but it's the short time in which it happens, months to years, when it's not supposed to be it's taken evolutionary strides in just a relatively very, very short time, and it's not just space we're talking about, it's like, you shouldn't be losing, like, this portion or the not a whole hemisphere, who knows, how they actually evaluate it or whatever, I haven't, like, seen charts or anything, but, like, let's suppose it's, like, I don't know, a third of your left hemisphere that's gone, it's like, you shouldn't be able to be doing the things you're doing, you see what I mean? Like,
Well,
because,
he wasn't doing a lot of things, I'll tell you, but like the things,
he wasn't a vegetable either.
yeah, I mean, you can certainly be missing large portions of your brain.
Yeah.
Like, you're not gonna be 100%. You could still be decently functional, but I don't think that these things in terms of evolutionary gains. I mean, when we think about the way that the brain develops, it's kind of like, when you have 2 electrodes, like on a block of wood or something, and they just send electricity out in all directions, and then they get a point of contact, and then
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
that gets strengthened and all the others die away. That's
Yeah.
like how the brain develops. I mean, you
Yeah, yeah,
start
yeah, I totally get it,
way more
neuroplasticity,
knowledge.
yeah.
And then once that, like, you close the circuit and
Yeah.
then all the other neurons around it die away and wither away. So like the brain is really capable of, like, these neurons are capable of, like, when these circuits are broken or whatever, like they will find the other circuit and strengthen it. You can change the neural architecture to like a surprising degree, as long as the overall, like the rough grain macro level of it can still form those connections. You can suffer a lot of
Yeah.
losses.
See, here's the thing. Like, what about the eyeball? Forgive me for like bringing up something that sounds random, but very complex as well. Of course, I'm not going to talk about like design arguments or anything like that. But like when it loses, like I tore my retina in high school, so I have a permanent blind spot. So when you lose cells that allowed you to see, you don't gain them back when it heals, because it will heal. You don't get sight.
Hmm.
Like, so what makes it such that the brain can repair itself and do those things, but the eye can't? And you still have to limit yourself into terms of, oh, it's only neurons, or it's, well, let's say it's only atoms. Like, that doesn't explain like why one organ can do it and the other can't. You see what I mean?
Well, the eye doesn't have something that's akin to neuroplasticity, like with like the entire
What
way
is
that
neuroplasticity though?
I'm explaining that. Like the
Okay, go
entire
ahead.
notion of the brain having memories is something that has no analogy to an eye or like other organs. Where the way that the brain forms memories is through neuroplasticity of strengthening certain connections that, like, every time a circuit works, it gets stronger at that circuit. It reinforces that
I
circuit. Whenever
agree
something
with you, but
wither away.
my
Well,
my
the
issue is that,
thing is with the brain damage, if you were to fundamentally sever all of these circuits, you're not going to be able to regenerate activity after that. I
yeah,
mean, like, even if they're temporarily severed, like in a case of anesthesia or something, you don't have consciousness. Like, and then as soon as the anesthetic is ceased to be delivered, like, you regain consciousness. I mean, I don't understand, from your perspective, why it would be the case that there seems to be this causal relationship between changes in brains and neurons and changes in
mhm.
consciousness.
Yeah, because one's dependent upon the other. I mean, the one, I mean, you can, yeah, I mean, you can change, uh, yeah. Let's take a genus species relation. You can change something from red to blue, and you've also changed the coloredness of it in some sense, or from white to blue or something like that. So you've also changed its coloredness. Now it's colored, but you've only changed its blueness. Um, it's a bad example probably,
But
but
you don't think that consciousness is either physical or not purely physical, or it's not, there's something more,
no,
just molecules in
no, I
motion.
think it's non-physical. And like I raised that book because um,
So then why is it that changing something physical changes something that's not
yeah, it's
physical?
just that raises a really good question. That's the problem of interaction, the problem of interactionism that we get like from Descartes and even earlier. And like every modern philosopher has to wrestle with this problem: how do physical stuff interact with non-physical stuff? So, but to my earlier question, it's like I agree with you that the brain does all these magnificent and extraordinary things, but my issue is that if the explanation is only, hey, really complex atoms are at work here, I agree that the brain is plastic. Why is it that those atoms are doing this over here that makes it plastic, but over here in the eye it doesn't?
It-
Like it
because the
seems
eye.
not to be a satisfying explanation, because they're both organs of the human body.
Mhm.
They both receive blood. They both receive
But
so on and so
organs do
on.
different things, right?
They do different things, and that raises a more fundamental question: like, why is it, if everything's atoms, why should certain things be different over here when there are certain atoms arranged, brain wise, and certain atoms arranged over here? It doesn't seem like just a material, um, part whole relationship of complexity accounts for what's happening, and so that leads me to reject.
Why not?
Back to our current point, it leads me to reject just the consciousness just being merely physical. I think it's more than physical.
But I mean, do you think? Do you think? Are you like a panpsychist or something? Like, if we were to take
No.
like a single cell that we would both agree is not conscious, you still have this same instance where different parts of the cell, different organelles, are behaving different than others, and they're all
Yeah.
controlled by the same mechanisms that ultimately form our brains, like genetic expression, following chemical gradients, like the normal paths of development. So if you can accept the answer for the single cell, I don't see why you can't accept it for not even just the brain, but just non-conscious human organs. I mean, if you can accept it for the single cell, you should be able to accept it for a multicellular organism like this.
I mean, I accept that physical stuff can do really complex and magnificent things, but I don't accept that it can explain higher order consciousness, rationality, uh, or qualia. Like it can't. Like
I
I've seen the arguments, and I'm totally unconvinced.
I mean,
So
okay,
I mean,
we
happy to go through you with them like another time. I'd totally be happy to do that, and we can like break down like
okay.
Chalmers' exact like why is it the hard problem of consciousness? What's your big deal with qualia? Why are those special? Why aren't those accounted for materialism? So on. I mean,
I
I'd be
do
happy to
reject
revisit the
this
arguments with
idea
you,
of philosophical zombies. I don't think that
and
those
that's
are
fine. But that's I mean,
logical.
qualia to my recollection, qualia and zombies are only two philosophical arguments against uh, materialism. There are like several others. Um, yeah, like you got the unity of consciousness, perspectivalness, yeah, and some other. There's
In terms of
one
rationality,
other
though,
metaphysical thought experiment. I
we've
totally
talked a
forget
lot
the
about
name of.
consciousness. I just want to touch on rationality
Yeah,
real quick.
yeah.
Okay, if I mean, it just rationality seems to make the most sense in an evolutionary paradigm, right? Like making
No,
rational
are you
decisions.
familiar with Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism?
No,
That is fantastic. Actually, he says you don't have to be you don't it doesn't entail you can't be a naturalist. It doesn't entail you can't believe in evolution, but it entails you can't believe in the conjunction of those two things.
interesting. I'll have to look that up
It's
or
like one of his
follow
famous
up.
arguments. Yeah. So, for example, like so say is one of his famous examples is like suppose I see a tiger running at me, and I form the belief. He thinks you just can't get beliefs on this and accurate beliefs like truth seeking beliefs. Like I form the belief somehow. I could one form the normal belief of like this tiger's trying to harm me and I want to run away in order to preserve my life and it's evolutionarily successful and so on. And so I climb a tree. But I could also have the just as evolutionarily successful belief that that tiger is my friend, he loves me, and the best way to please him is to climb the tree. One is truth seeking and the other's not, but they're both evolutionarily successful. So evolution can't account, at least on naturalistic growth. I think he's a theistic evolutionist.
I don't know. I
Super
don't.
fascinating. Like get into the details of it. Super fascinating.
I so you're saying that like it would be like you could develop an irrational response to
Yeah.
friendliness? Like anytime you think something is friendly, you run away from it and up a tree. I don't think that in the long run such a belief would be evolutionarily advantageous because
It doesn't have to account. It doesn't
you
have
could
to
meet
account
other
to
humans that
all.
are friendly and then you'd run up a tree and then ruin your chances of
Sure.
reproduction.
Sure. No, it doesn't have to extrapolate and generalize to humans. It's just within this dangerous scenario, like what we normally take to be dangerous, you could form the belief that that's dangerous, so you run away, or you could form the belief that. And so, with respect to only tigers chasing me in the wild, I could just come to believe that they're friendly, but it's going
Sure.
to have the same successful rate of preserving my life.
Yeah,
And
but
so, it
again,
doesn't mean I need to generalize it to like all humans. I need to run away from them. Not at all.
I think these beliefs are not in vacuo. Like they are like they're going to affect your other beliefs if you think that, oh, tigers are super friendly, that's why we run away from them into trees. That's not going to be a belief that is like your only divergent belief. I mean, it's going to come as a package with a
But
lot of other ones.
you know well enough though to like have met some conspiracy theorists that you've even debated some,
Yeah,
and
and
they
that's what I
have
was going to
really
say.
coherent systems of belief that are completely wrong,
That's what I
and they
was
can
about
be
to say is that humans are not fundamentally rational creatures. We can sometimes make rational
yep.
decisions, but as a whole, we're quite irrational. And most of the time, humans do not make a decision based on rationality.
Mm,
They make a decision based on like their identity,
absolutely, yeah.
a group think, or whatever. And it just seems like the way that humans make decisions is completely in line with what we would expect if they were evolved as social groupings. Like
I mean,
the way that they,
maybe.
the way that humans think just makes more
Yeah.
sense if they were evolved to be group creatures.
Yeah, maybe. I'll let you have last word here because we need to wrap up. But um, I'm wondering, like, because I can think about it both ways. Like, humans are super wonderfully rational and magnificently so, and very impressively so, and they are many times, and it can really impress you. But then this is why I got out of epistemology, because everybody was presuming that you have to build your epistemology around a hyper rational agent. It's like humans don't work like that. There's a lot of humans that aren't rational at all. Probably vast majority of humans are not rational, operate rationally all the time. So, um, but like it's like I think both are true. You know what I mean? You can
Yeah.
have ultra rational individuals, and you can have people that just are not rational. Um, I'm not sure that that datum alone like explains or is something that evolution can like explain. Like, why is it that, I mean, because like super rational people, philosophers, for example, on an evolutionary account, they should be super successful. But why do they always get the like least paying jobs? You know what I mean? Like the most rational people. Evolutionaries like selecting for rationality, but it's not rewarding philosophy somehow. It seems, I don't know. I want my money back, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it seems like there are all manners of it seemed to me that rational behaviors arise before rational thinking does. For example, like single cells, like we talked about before, they make plenty of rational behaviors. They see food, or like they sense food, they go after food. They can run away from predators or whatever. They make
Mhm.
they have behaviors that align with what a rational thing would do with those motivations, but
Yeah.
they have thinking. So
Yeah. Like,
it comes to a turn of goes back
I'm being
talking about with split.
equivocal here. Sorry, I'm being
I mean,
equivocal here with what I'm saying rationality is. Like, yes, means to end rationality is what you're describing. There's also higher order rationality, which I gave the philosophers example
well,
of. So, I mean,
so
we should be more careful about the way we're using rationality, of course, and I've been
I'm
very
trying to
loose
make
with
the
it.
point
So,
here. I'm trying to
yeah.
tie it back to the split brains, and we didn't really
Okay.
talk free will, but I don't
Yeah.
really in free will. But if um if this left-hand interpreter that we're talking about with left brain is coming up with this cohesive story experience of our behaviors, then it could be that the rational behaviors is really what is more primary than rational thinking. And the rational thinking is just
Sure.
the experience that our brain is creating of our already rational behaviors, and that you're just coming up with a sort of narrative to experience our bodies de behaviors and decisions through. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's something to think about at least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really great having you here. I'm so glad you came. How did you stumble upon this? You just like kind of see it in your feed or whatever?
Yeah, the YouTube out well, I think because I watched the video with you and, Justin from
Oh, I
Deconstruct
got you. Yeah.
and
Cool.
then the algorithm just suggested this to me on my feed as a result of that
Yeah.
would be my guess.
I was like sick over the weekend and I watched like a couple Office clips and now it thinks I'm just like obsessed with The Office. It's the only thing it's feeding me. I'm like, I want to watch other stuff too. You know?
Mm,
I totally get it. Yeah. But thanks
cool,
for
it's
being here,
fun.
man. Please come back. It's been really enjoyable. So I'll see you
Cool.
next time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, Grayson.